Welcome to another episode of Cultivate. This is a show about you and your journey in the cannabis industry. It's moving fast, but there's room for everyone. Buckle up as we bring you the people and the technology that are blazing the trail.
We're having a podcast. We're doing Cultivate. This is Boveda's attempt to engage the people and the technology that are blazing a trail in the cannabis industry, because we're the little company from Minnesota that has this desire to be involved in everybody's cannabis outcomes because we really feel strongly about what we're capable of doing. And we're excited to get to know what you're doing. So we're with Andrew DeAngelo, one of the infamous DeAngelo brothers that are involved with Harborside. And now that might be underestimating what you're doing. I say Harborside because that's the way I relate to it. Has it gotten bigger than Harborside? Is it?
Well, yes.
Because you just had something big happen just a week
That's
or two
right.
ago.
That's right. We launched our latest nonprofit. Steve and I and a team of really talented, amazing people have launched the Last Prisoner Project soft launch last week at Jim Belushi's house. We're trying to raise money for our big launch that we're doing in the fall. And the mission of that nonprofit's very simple. Get everybody out of prison for cannabis on earth.
Right.
So right now, here we are at this conference. Companies like you have been around for a long time, even before the cannabis scene started to hit globally and nationally here in the United States. It all started in California, right, with Prop 215 medical cannabis. And so now we're seeing, cut from 1996 when that first law was passed till today, 2019, and you have billion-dollar companies being traded publicly. You have multi-state operators. You have all kinds of auxiliary companies like yourselves, and folks are making an awful lot of money for doing the same exact thing that these folks are locked up for.
Right.
Growing, transporting, manufacturing, and distributing cannabis.
Do you have a sense how many people that impacts? I mean, is there I understand the goal of getting people out of prison for non-violent or like if I committed a murder and I had a bunch of weed, that's a little complicated compared to just being busted for possession or so what are the limits of what you're trying to do, and how do people connect with that charity? What's the
Right. Well, it is very complicated, as you say. The first thing I'll tell everybody, lastprisonerproject.org is the website. You can learn more about what we're doing there and what our strategy is, right? Because it's not just getting people out of prison. We also have to get them jobs and have them reorient themselves to society. When you get out of prison, you're given a bus ticket and thank you very much, you're out of prison now.
Set them up for success.
Not set up for success, right? And not even set up to spend the night in a home sometimes and you're out on the street. So part of our mission is to partner with people in our industry to set up instead of having a schools to prison pipeline like we have now, and particularly in American cities, we are going to build a prison to jobs pipeline so that we can employ people in our industry who've been locked up for the same thing that we're all doing every single day in our company. So that's the mission of LPP. To get a sense of how many people are locked up, we estimate about 40,000 in the United States, and that's just purely nonviolent. Once you start including people who perhaps had a gun in their possession, maybe they didn't use the gun, but they had it in their possession, a gun was found, then those numbers go up.
Yep.
And I'll just tell you one quick story. Michael Pelletier is a man who, when he was 11 years old, he was in a farming accident, Midwestern, not far from Minnesota, in Michigan, actually. And he got busted bringing loads in across the lake from Canada. He didn't have any guns with him. He's a paraplegic. He was injured when he was a kid. This was the way he made a living. And it was his medicine too, right?
Yeah,
you're a paraplegic. And he got busted. They didn't find any firearms on him, but of course, as soon as you're busted out in the field, they put you in the squad car and they take you to your home. They get a search warrant and they searched his house. They found a couple antique guns at his home. And so now this man is in prison for life.
Aggravating factor. That's a technicality.
Yeah, for life.
Oh,
okay,
man.
and he is a paraplegic. He's in a wheelchair. He's doing the same thing we've all done for years and years and years. And that's the perfect example of why Steve and I have launched this nonprofit and why we're so passionate about this. We've got to get people out. We cannot sit here at a conference like this and make multi-million-dollar deals and think about these folks that are locked up that are really truly our brothers and sisters, and many of them were the pioneers.
Right.
Were the pioneers who just happened to get busted along the way and didn't have the resources to get a really good lawyer, or didn't have the resources to fight the case, or copped a plea deal that, of course, they regret now, or whatever the particular circumstances must be. We got to get them out. So that's the mission of LPP.
So I ask you the question about the big deal that happened in the last couple of weeks, and you immediately default to the Last Prisoner Project, as opposed to that little thing that went down with the markets and the IPO.
Right.
So I think it says a lot when the answer to the question is, we launched a charity, the lastprisonerproject.org, and instead of talking about your IPO, you want to give us a little update on what went down and how excited you are about that?
Sure, and I don't mean to discount the IPO. It's a huge...
It's cool, though, that you went to the charity first.
Well, this
when
just...
It shows where your heart's at.
We're just... you can take the DeAngelo out of the man, but not the man out of the DeAngelo, I guess. But that's what's important to Steve and I, right?
No, that's cool.
The mission is more important to us than the money. It's always been that way. But we do have to pay our bills, and we have a payroll of 200 or 300 people we have to support. And now that we're a publicly traded company on the Canadian Stock Exchange, our mandate is to grow like every public company. So it's a really wonderful story that here's this little engine that could, Harborside, that started 13 years ago, that was attacked by the federal government, not just with the forfeiture action, but the 280E case, which we're still fighting in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco. We're on appeal there. We've taken all these arrows for the industry, right, with those cases. And we had to learn how to operate a retail store at the highest levels, right? Our vision for Harborside was to create a model that was a gold standard for everybody, that all walks of life feel comfortable in, that didn't have bars on the window, that didn't have guys with big guns standing outside the door, and that allowed people to learn about cannabis, this new thing, and to feel safe in the community that this dispensary was there. So this little dispensary that could has now gone all the way to the Canadian Stock Exchange. We've defeated the federal government. We beat the forfeiture action. We transitioned from a nonprofit medical model to a for-profit adult use model in California. We all know how difficult that's been for everybody the last year and a half. And now finally Harborside can access the public markets, and anybody on earth can now invest in the Harborside story and buy a few shares. And so it's a really wonderful moment for us.
So I can actually buy into your business in some small way.
Yes, anybody can. You do have to figure out how to do that on the Canadian Stock Exchange.
Okay.
So you have to get yourself a broker.
Because now anybody can participate in the direction of the company.
Yes.
That's fantastic.
So jumping back to day one, you were an aspiring actor.
That's right.
Then what happened? What was that transition from wanting to go down that path to starting Harborside and getting into the cannabis space?
Well, it actually happened way before Harborside opened. So I went to grad school to study to be a classical stage actor and film actor in the early 90s. And what got me into this was all my colleagues were dying of AIDS. And Dennis Perrone was sitting there in San Francisco doing the great work of bringing the medicine to the people. You had ACT UP that was trying to bring awareness to the country that AIDS was a real thing, and that we needed to talk about this openly, and we needed to identify this as a crisis that the country needed to respond to. It took a decade just to get, the President of the United States to say AIDS, to say the word AIDS or HIV. So I was in the middle of that fight as a young man, and these people that I was creating theater with were dying, were getting sick and dying, and luckily I was already a cannabis person at that time. I was already selling cannabis to all the actors
But
and
this is really
technicians.
the original crucible of where cannabis became relevant in this whole medical use approach.
That's right.
Was to address the AIDS crisis.
That's right.
That's where it
exactly
began.
Right. That's right where it began, Drew. You're absolutely right. And Dennis Perrone and Brownie Mary and John Entwistle and a whole bunch of other unsung heroes made it happen. And they took tremendous risks. Some of them went to prison. Dennis got shot by a police officer, some years before that. And so Dennis was a target of the police for his whole life, really. And that's where it all began. And so I was a young actor at that time. The Iraq War started at that time. The AIDS crisis was raging at that time. This conservative revolution that Ronald Reagan and the first Bush sort of ushered in was ending, was sort of dying a little bit. And it was time for me to activate myself. So I became radicalized, if you will. And I was performing these Shakespeare plays at night, in front of people that were pretty privileged. And they were watching me perform Shakespeare, and I'm up there, emoting my heart out and making sure I could tell the story just right. And I realized I wasn't having the impact that I was having when I woke up early in the morning. I'd go demonstrate against the war, I'd go sell weed with Dennis, or I'd go collect signatures with John to get medical cannabis on the ballot. We got it on the ballot in the city of San Francisco first, and then we got it on the ballot statewide, but we had to get it on the ballot in San Francisco first, and that happened in '92. So I was brought into the scene in that way, and of course my brother Steve was already a huge icon and activist in cannabis, and he was launching his industrial hemp company, Ecolution, right as I was finishing my studies. So it became a natural fit for me to, once I graduated from the conservatory, to join Steve back east in my hometown of Washington, D.C., and we had the industrial hemp company for Ecolution Incorporated, first company to make 100% hemp denim since Levi Strauss did it in the 1800s. And very proud of that. That company was about 30 years ahead of its time. I wish I had that company right now.
Yeah.
Well, Levi Strauss is an iconic brand that's based in San Francisco.
And they are now starting to blend hemp into their jeans for the first time. Yes, they just made that announcement, I think, a month or two ago.
Wow.
They're going to start with blends, so it won't be 100% hemp. But I'm excited that the day will come shortly where there'll be lots of 100% hemp denim.
Yeah.
My shoes I'm wearing right now are actually hemp.
No way.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So I want to plant a seed for a possible comment later. If you have an immediate reaction to this, great. But otherwise, just shelve it for later. We'll come back to it. We'll go talk about justice some more. But are you haunted by Shakespeare? Since you did so much of it? Do you have something that's just like is part of your mantra, your
that I could say?
That, yeah, I mean, mine would be, shall I act upon the urging that I feel or remain passive and thus cease to exist? Which sounds like the augur of where you were back in your, when you got started as an activist.
Well, to be or not to be, that is the question, is sort of what we're all asking ourselves in this industry right now, right? So
see how that kind of...
You did well.
Wasn't that cool?
That was cool.
God, I'm gonna watch this over and over again.
That was so cool. I mean, not many
home.
people who interview me can quote Shakespeare off the cuff. So
good
for you.
I want to go back to justice, and I want to ask you a question that I've asked a number of people in the industry. Originally, this whole initiative was started in order to support patients.
Yes.
The medical patient was at the center of everything. And I talked to a trimmer, a fellow by the name of Tim, who got into the business because his wife was dying of cancer and he wanted her to have access to the flower. And we had just a heart-rending conversation about what he went through to support his wife, how cannabis changed her outcomes for the long and really rewarding descent for her before she passed. They had real high-quality life together because of what cannabis did for her. So he said to me, I'll offer you this. He said, I think that California has sold its soul in the cannabis industry. And a lot of people talk about big business and they talk about companies and this whole attitude about corporations and, selling your soul to the the cause has been sort of sublimated. The patient's no longer at the center of the cannabis conversation. I want to know how you feel about that, and if you agree in any sense of that. Has there been I'll give you an example of what happened in Canada. When they went adult use, they had an unintended consequence where same thing happened in Las Vegas. The patient couldn't get any medicine because they didn't prepare and hold back stock to have people have access. So that's sort of my contextualization of selling your soul. So, and I also have the other end of this. I'll tell you the punchline before I ask you to comment on it. I think that every stakeholder can participate in the industry buying its soul back. If we found a way for anybody that's terminal to have free access to cannabis. Any stakeholder, whether it's Lori Ajax and her department at the state of California, they can participate, the producers can participate, the stores, the local governments that are benefiting so much, the ones that haven't rejected brick and mortar in their neighborhoods. So that's just sort of a broad frame to throw that into. But do you think that the industry has sort of naturally sold its soul because of how it's grown up and shifted to more of a commercial endeavor? And do you think there is a clarion call in the industry to buy back that soul and maybe do some altruistic things beyond what you suggested earlier with the Last Prisoner Project?
Well, I think your question is a really important one and a good one, and I'm thrilled that you asked me it, even though it's a painful question for all of us to consider. The story you just told about the trimmer who got into this to help his wife with cancer, and that it worked. He got into it. He was able to access the medicine. He was able to provide the medicine, and the medicine did its job. Steve and I have heard that story tens of thousands of times in the last 13, 14 years since we've had Harborside. We want that story to continue in the world. We want that story to happen over and over again. And we don't want that story to not happen because we haven't created an effective design for legalization and regulation. We got the design wrong in California really badly. I serve on the board of directors for the California Cannabis Industry Association. I'm one of the founding board members. I've been a part of that organization from the beginning for the last 8 or 9 years, and we've worked very hard to try to fix some of the structural problems that exist within the law and the regulations that are preventing patients from getting the access to the kind of cannabis they need, at the quantities they need, at the potency they need. In terms of free cannabis to people in need, we did run a bill this summer that's working its way through the California legislature. I'm confident it will pass. One of the few that's going to pass this session that will help patients and that will help us all create access to sick people and poor people. So I'm confident that will happen. Once that passes, then we're going to be able to give free medicine back to the terminally ill or people just living in poverty. And then it'll be up to operators like Harborside and others to create programs for the community that they exist in so that we can continue that care package program. Harborside has had a care package program from day one until the laws and regulations changed it. And then we sort of pivoted. We tried to pivot around that with this 1 penny or $1, SKU prices that we try to do as often as we can to bring folks in. And we still heal people with alternative holistic services at our shop in Oakland. They're not free anymore. We have to charge a sliding scale for them. I can't afford to pay for them anymore as I did when we were a nonprofit. But if there's a will, there's a way. And we have to fix the structural problems with taxes in California. We have to fix the structural problems with local control. As you mentioned, 60% of the land mass in the California is banned. There's bans in place.
Okay, so put that in context. So every time you have a change in regulation, it affects this at the state level, at the county level, at the municipal level, and what they've decided to do is reject brick and mortar in their neighborhoods, right? Is that the
Well,
bottom
the
line?
way Prop 64 worked, and we could probably do a whole podcast on what went wrong with Prop 64, but
That's a great idea. Maybe we should schedule that.
I think you should invite Sean Parker and see if he'll come on.
Love to do it with you as well.
Yeah, I'd love to be on with him. Sean Parker was the funder of Prop 64, and his voice was very loud and important because the funders are the ones that ultimately make the decisions when you do an initiative process. And some of the decisions he made empowered the local people, and some of the decisions empowered the tax authorities to tax. And those decisions are coming back to haunt us in a pretty big way right now, especially when you're talking about patients, people who live in poverty, equity licensees and equity people who are trying to get into the industry. Barriers of entry are simply too high. So there's a lot to fix.
It's the same with Minnesota. I don't know if you know much about the medical market in Minnesota, but we had Charlie Rutherford. This is how Boveda became really passionate about the cannabis industry. His leg was amputated in a motorcycle accident.
Oh my God.
So he had phantom pain,
Yeah.
got hooked on opiates, wasn't finding relief. Obviously, we all know the downfalls of opiates and all the side effects that happen from that.
Yeah.
And so he went to cannabis, and he ended up getting his medical license or card in Minnesota. But he couldn't afford the prescription. They don't allow for flower. It was very limited. They only allowed two producers,
yeah.
2 or 3 dispensaries where you could get it, and he couldn't afford to use. And he's a successful guy in business, and he couldn't even afford it. So he's going to Colorado and other states to source his medicine.
Yeah, it's very sad. Listen, we have to create wide access at an affordable price. We can't let every NIMBY in the world block a cannabis dispensary in their neighborhood. We have to have some kind of check and balance on that. There was a bill run in Sacramento that failed this year that would have provided such a check and balance. And it basically said that if Prop 64 passed in your community, you have to license retail. And you have to license a certain amount per 25,000 citizens or 15,000. They couldn't decide on what the number was, right?
Sounds
But the
about
bill
right.
failed.
So is there any
The
other
bill
substance,
failed.
is there any other marketable good that gets treated the way cannabis gets treated? In terms, I mean, are there any jurisdictions in the state of California that outlaw alcohol? Are there?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't think there are any dry counties in California. There are certainly in Utah.
Was
but not-
that their purview to make that decision? Could they do that if they wanted to? The local control piece, or is this strictly something that they've done for, say, cannabis? And I presume gentlemen's clubs have the same issues with some municipalities.
That's right. I mean, local control is very sacred here in California. So the reason we have a homeless crisis is because locals aren't building enough affordable housing. The reason we have an affordable housing crisis, locals aren't building enough affordable housing. Nobody wants a homeless shelter in their neighborhood. Nobody wants a cannabis dispensary in their neighborhood. Nobody wants working class housing in their neighborhood. Well, people have to live somewhere. And so we're having this problem in California. It's not just the cannabis issue. There's lots of other issues, and local control is very sacred here. It's very built into the political establishment. We have one party rule in California. The Democrats basically rule everything here. And so local control is baked into almost everything in California. So it's not just cannabis. But I will say that the locals have banned cannabis dispensaries a lot more than they have a gentleman's club, for instance. Certainly alcohol, certainly tobacco, certainly firearms, things like that one could argue are much more harmful to communities than cannabis ever will be. So here in California, local control is pretty strong.
Well, it's intriguing because the presumption is that if you have a cannabis dispensary, you're going to have all sorts of vice that goes along with it. And the reality, in my experience, having visited cannabis dispensaries all over the country where they allow me in, it's and some states don't allow me in because I'm like last week I was in Arizona. I don't have a Arizona medical card. I couldn't get in because you have to be a resident.
That's
so you
right.
can't. It's a great way to limit the number of salesmen coming through your front door. But intriguing thing is, so many of these towns and cities where they have cannabis dispensaries, they are a source for good. They're a source for community. They're a source for jobs. They're a source for people coming together. You don't see. It's not like some, tacky, dingy smoke shop that's just kind of the Wild West. It's like they're sophisticated. There's a lot of really cool things going on inside.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more. We have this perception problem. I know of a group in Napa right now that's trying to open a medical-only dispensary. That's all they allow in Napa is medical. And there's a neighborhood group that is just going crazy up there. And that same mythology is what the neighborhood group is telling their members. Oh, there's going to be more crime near the dispensary. There's going to be a lot more homeless people. There's going to be all these undesirable elements. And it's just not true. If you examine the data, if you examine the crime statistical data, you see that crime goes down in the dispensaries because we have security cameras everywhere, and we have security guards everywhere, and we have eyes on the neighborhood everywhere. So we're a much harder target for anyone who's trying to rob somebody or follow any of that. We're a much harder target, right? The biggest danger is it's all cash businesses, right?
Right.
So really nasty people can take advantage of that. So it's a misperception that we have to tell our story better, and we have to reduce the stigma of cannabis in society. Podcasts, storytelling, television shows, films, these are the things that we need to have these positive experiences being told over and over and
Well,
over.
and you're a great spokesperson for that type of thing. That's why this is so exciting for us to get you on our podcast, because when the idea came up, you had a ready outline of things that you were more than happy to talk about. They were all very interesting.
Yep.
And one of them was the concept of culture and decision-making structures. If we have time, do we still have a little time?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about. You mentioned stigma. Let's talk about stigma, culture, decision-making structures, and then let's segue into tourism.
And I have one quick question. If someone's listening right now and they want to get into the cannabis space, make a difference, make a change in their own community, what would you advise them to do?
Boy, that's a very big question, isn't it? It really does depend where you live.
If I lived in San Francisco.
If you live in San Francisco, I would learn about the different companies that are. First, figure out your skill set. What's your skill set, and how do you want to contribute, right? That's very important. When I'm hiring people at Harborside, when I know somebody is in touch with their own skill set and what their strengths and weaknesses are, the interview is going to go a lot better. Pick companies that you believe in, whose missions you believe in, whose leadership you feel aligns with your own integrity and your own values. Because there's a lot of different companies now with a lot of different values and a lot of different missions. And some companies, they just want to make money for their shareholders. Other companies are run by people like me and Steve who have a much bigger mission involved that includes getting people out of prison and lifting people out of poverty. And so you can plug in with folks like that are aligned with your values. We're always looking for people who our mission speaks to and who get excited about what we're doing. That's the most important thing. What we try to do in our organization is we try to develop a sense of trust and shared consciousness. So instead of carrots and sticks, carrots and sticks are very popular. You got a number. You hit your number, boy, I'm going to give you a carrot. You don't hit your number, I'm going to whack you with a stick.
It sounds familiar. I was immediately shuddering in fear when you went to carrots and sticks.
Right?
Yeah,
we all have that reaction.
It elicits fear, yes.
And like the annual performance review is another thing that causes anxiety, right? And so I think we need a different approach to how we make decisions and how we work together. And I think most of us are getting it wrong in our industry. And I like to leverage trust and shared consciousness instead of command and control and carrot and sticks. And it's because I learned the hard way. Harborside started to grow right from the beginning. Our business model was very popular, and all of a sudden, before you knew it, we had hundreds of people a day coming through the business, and I had to manage all that. I had to run it on the day to day. And we had a lot of constraints, whether it be political constraints or regulatory constraints, or we just didn't know, or banking constraints or federal government constraints. And you have all these constraints. And it causes complexity in your ecosystem that command and control just doesn't keep up with. The complexity is moving so fast with so many interdependencies that if you try to command and control that, you're going to have a very difficult time creating a culture that makes people excited to come to work every day.
Right.
So what I learned was, okay, hold on. I need you to make decisions, and I need the person at the lowest level of the organization, whether it be the cleaners who clean the retail store or whether it be the person ringing up the sale. I need that person to be a decision maker. And so I have to prepare them to make decisions. And they have to feel comfortable making decisions. That's where the trust comes in. And I need to know that they're going to make a good decision. So I have to get them downloaded on what the mission is, what the goals are, what the values are, so that it's part of their DNA, it's part of their muscle memory. And once I've done that hard work, and it's a lot of hard work to create trust and shared consciousness. Yeah. It's a lot easier to write a SOP, give somebody a number and say, go meet it. Really easy to do that. But what happens when it breaks down? You have to fire somebody. Well, what if it wasn't their fault? It's not anybody's fault that there's 500 dispensaries in California and nobody's licensing any new ones. Well, if you're a consumer-facing brand, how do you grow in that environment? Very difficult to grow in that environment, right? You can be the greatest salesperson in the world. How are you going to grow in that environment? And so then you don't hit your number and you're going to fire that person. They're going to walk away with all the institutional knowledge that they have, especially if they were early or a founder or a family member, really? So no, I learned a different way, and that is let them make decisions. Let them take care of the customer. Let them figure out what's wrong with this package and solve it. Let's figure out why this isn't compliant. And let's push that decision-making downward, and let's have transparency in our decisions. So I need to know when my general manager's making a decision. I need to know what the decision is. Then we can groove on it together, right? And I can say, you know, I would have done that a little differently.
Yep.
Or rock and roll, exactly right.
So you're creating alignment and you're unleashing their creativity.
Yes.
You're empowering.
You're empowering people to shine, let their
And they're going to make mistakes.
Right.
They're going to make the wrong decision. And that's going to put egg on your face
Well, and you and
sometime
Steve
as a
never made
leader.
the wrong decision, right?
We've made every wrong decision one can make,
But that's
right?
wisdom. When you get to reflect on a body
That's
of
right.
work and see all the mistakes and know which ones not to make again.
You don't learn as much from success as you do from failure or from making mistakes. You just learn a lot more from that. All these feelings come up. You know you've made a mistake as a leader, right? And there's people depending on us. We've got 300 people on payroll. I worry every 2 weeks, right? I want to meet that payroll. I need them to have a prosperous life to go home to. And that's very hard right now in California, right?
Well, you've just finished one full year, July to July, of having stable regs. I remember last year was a nightmare. We had the first half of last year. It was every plan, every projection that anybody had for what we were going to accomplish last year was handicapped by the first 6 months being a complete yard sale. I mean, it was awful because of the regs. So July, it started in earnest. You've had a full trip around the sun. What's the outlook? What's the indication from what you just saw? Where's this going, and how optimistic are you? How excited are you about the future?
Great question. Drew, you're full of really good questions. We'll have to ask you about Shakespeare a little later, too.
Well, I'm just imagining somebody showing up to interview at Harborside in full Shakespearean garb next week because they're going to riff on some Hamlet with me, man. I know how to get through to DeAngelo.
I think the players in the industry that are in the supply chain that have some kind of licensing, whether it be provisional or permanent now, or temporary or provisional, I guess it is, not permanent, are doing their best. They're innovating, they're learning, they're getting better all the time. But I don't think it's nearly enough. The structural problems facing us in California are so enormous that 80% of the cannabis transactions in this state are happening in the illicit market. 80%.
So nothing's changed. It's been that way
Well,
for...
actually, it was more like 75% in 2017.
So it's gotten worse.
It's gotten worse. We lost $500 million of market share 2018 over 2017, according to BDS Analytics.
Going back to the illicit market.
Right, because the patients or people, working class people, I mean, people know how to buy weed in California, okay? And the fact that mine has a lab test on it and the person down the street doesn't move the needle so much after 100 years of prohibition. It just doesn't.
Right.
And we can market all we want to, and the state can throw millions of dollars talking about the legal market, but until we address the structural constraint of taxes and local control and regulation, both state and local, until we address those three pillars, we're all going to be fighting each other over this 20%. We're going to be stabbing each other and slicing each other and dicing each other, and we're going to be very competitive, and we're going to be blocking sensible reform. We had a bill, the bill I mentioned earlier, that would have opened up retail. Yeah. We had people in our industry oppose that bill. We had people, very big players, multi-state operators, oppose that bill because they didn't want another dispensary in their little community that they had one in. Are you kidding me?
Wow.
So let's drive down on that one point about the share that's going to taxation. If you sat down with a napkin and penciled out what's fair and what's effective, what's the solution?
Well, I think that consumers are comfortable paying 10%, maybe 15% more to be in a legal market experience. Right now, it's 50 or 60% more. That's
huge.
That won't happen. Nobody got a 50% pay raise January 1, 2018 that I know of. Nobody did. Maybe the investment bankers that took all these companies like Harborside public did. But, no. So it's very hard if you're a consumer. I'm a heavy consumer of cannabis. I take 400 or 500 milligrams of edible cannabinoids a day, and I probably smoke another quarter ounce of weed a day. I'm a heavy consumer. It would cost me 6 figures a year to get all those cannabinoids in the legal market right now. 6 figures, man. And nobody has that. So it's very, very hard. If I wasn't who I am, I would be hurting. I would be hurting to get the cannabis I need for myself right now. So until we fix those things, there's going to be a war over the 20%. Some people are going to win that war, and some people aren't going to lose that war. It's probably not going to be based on merit. It's probably going to be based on who can bleed the longest and still stand up at the end of the day. And that would be unfortunate course of events if the winners are the ones that just were able to bleed longer and it wasn't really based on merit. Right. Now, we've got some great models in the California market that are trying their hardest, Harborside being one of them. Vertically integrated companies trying to get the price lower for the consumer, right? Vertical integration helps with that a little bit. You've got co-op models like Flowcana.
Yep.
Flowcana, I'm so proud of them. I love that company. I will talk about how brilliant they are just as much as I'll talk about how brilliant Harborside is. We have to have that attitude. We're all in this together attitude. Yeah, we have to look, everything that we're wearing, touching, can all be made out of cannabis. What you're going to eat today, what we're going to eat here today, a third of it can be made out of cannabis. Yeah. These glasses, everything. The opportunity is so great. We don't need to build any moats. We just need to tear down the walls, and tear the dams down and let the river of cannabis flow. there is plenty of room for everybody. We're going to need to keep cannabis fresh for the rest of humanity. Boveda's going to be fine, you know, and they're probably the markets could support 10 Bovedas, you know, when we're done with the cannabis renaissance 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. So that's what I see. I'm not optimistic because I've been in Sacramento for 2 years, 2 sessions trying to get some reform done, and we have just gotten our asses handed to us up there. And we've worked very, very hard. We have a great relationship with you know, everybody likes us. Everybody's
to her credit,
nice.
To her credit, she's awesome.
Are you talking about Lori Ajax?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's
a wonderful person.
Very transparent.
She's gone out of her way. I listened to her speak at Meadowlands at the camping deal last year before.
Yeah.
Tremendously accessible, trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
But there's so many people competing for the dollar, and there's so many bureaucrats making rules about things they don't understand.
Oh goodness.
That it's devastating. Interesting model where I'm going to coin it as the DeAngelo tax model. So let's put a cap on it at 20% for the consumer.
I like 10 or 15.
Okay, let's do 15 just to give them extra room because they're going to need it. But if it could be a staged thing, right now it's at 50%.
Yeah,
say that out loud. What is the tax right now?
Well, right now it depends what town you're in.
So if I'm in San Francisco,
if you're in San Francisco, you've got probably somewhere between a 40 and 55% increase from 2017 on products.
So I buy an eighth for, say a number, ballpark.
$50.
So I have an eighth that I buy for $50, and then I pay tax on top of that?
That's right.
And what's my net when I walk out the door?
You're probably walking out with $80, $85, $90 is what you're going to have to pay for that eighth.
This is why we do podcasts, because that kind of clarity about what the transactional experience. Imagine this. Let's take this back to hometown USA. Let's say I go up to the hardware store and I'm going to buy a gallon of windshield washer fluid for my car for $3.
Yep.
And I go to the register and they charge me
$2.10, maybe?
More than that. I mean, you got to put it
if it
were cannabis.
Oh, if it's cannabis, it would be $4.
Yeah.
$3 or $4. You know?
And what else does that happen with? What
nothing.
Else there is nothing else in our economy.
Tobacco has pretty intense taxes on it,
but they're all built into the. It's a different.
It's different, and there's a federal tax on tobacco, right? So the federal tax on tobacco is really, really onerous, and then the states can tax it any way they want.
And eventually there'll be a federal tax on cannabis as well.
Yes, you can count on that, brother. Of course, you know, none of us get out of death and taxes, so when the feds decide to pull the switch on this, I'm sure we'll have a federal tax rate there. Are they going to get it wrong at first and empower the illicit market?
Yes.
Well, which is what is happening now.
If you could place a bet on that in Vegas, I would certainly consider that a pretty good bet. But wine in California, for instance, $1 a gallon tax. $1 a gallon. So you can
that
go
seems reasonable to me.
Yeah, you can still buy $2 chuck at Trader Joe's, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can also buy the fancy cab from Napa Valley for $200.
But the dollar is going a different place.
But it's still $1.
It's still $1 to the taxing authority.
That's right. So the wine people got it right, and the cannabis people haven't got it right yet. But you know, there's more work to be done. So what people ask me, what's the future of cannabis? Well, the future of cannabis is to get that 80% that's illicit into the legal market. And whether you're a producer and you're in that 80% or you're a consumer in that 80%, there's the opportunity, boys and girls. I can tell you what drink is going to be popular 6 months from now, but you know what? You can probably pay Google and Facebook to give you the same darn information.
Right.
But if 80% of the transactions are in the illicit market, what good is my new drink flavor? I'm just going to compete with all the other drink flavors in that little 20%. So the future, we have to create one market, and we can't be afraid to do that. And right now we are afraid to do that, and we're either afraid because of stigma. Oh, I don't want one of those in my neighborhood. I don't want my kids walking past that. I don't want my kids to smell that. Or whether it's, you know, our own self-inflicted wounds where we block reform because we're being greedy and we're trying to protect our own little moat and our own little castle. And, you just had this article a few weeks ago where some folks in New York are trying to ban home growing in the regulations, and I know Illinois, I think, banned home growing.
Yeah.
Well, that's so stupid.
And it's fundamental to all
stupid.
That was fundamental to every legislative action for normalization was home grow.
Home growing is key to the whole.
It was a big deal in Canada. It's been a big deal all over the states. Every place they've had.
Everyone has this big fight about home grow, whether we should allow it or not. Why would you not want home grow? The only reason you don't want home grow is because you're scared that there's going to be cannabis in the neighborhood. You're a regulator, or you're a mayor, or you're a city councilor, or you're a neighborhood watch president, or you're a whatever you are. Or, we're in this situation where our own industry says, no, let's slow it down, and so I reject all of that.
Well, and I'd encourage anybody in the industry to advocate for as much freedom as possible for the home grower, for the vertically integrated, for the wholesaler, for anybody.
Yeah, right. And with home growing, the home grower doesn't compete with the legal market. There's no reason to lock them out. Just like the person who grows tomatoes in their backyard doesn't compete with Whole Foods' tomatoes. Right. They just don't.
Well, and if you have a home grow and you have your 4, or how many plants can you have in
6
California?
in California.
So if you had 6 plants and you nurtured these plants and you developed relationships with this plant, you're going to end up having an experience that's going to cause you to have a certain level of expertise and a certain level of experience with the plant. It humanizes the plant and allows it to be what it is, instead of this boogeyman that's been created
people
by
that are home growing to educate other people that aren't familiar with cannabis,
right?
And a higher level.
And we can take it even a step further. If we look at the past, growing your own cannabis was sort of a form of alternative commerce, right? Because a lot of times you had some extra weed from your crop, but you didn't have any money. But your roof got leaky. And so you could barter the extra cannabis you had with somebody who could fix your roof. We want to preserve that. Just like you can barter vegetables if you grow. I grow vegetables in my backyard, and when the cucumbers come in, there's too many of them for me to eat, me and my partner to eat. So I have to give some away.
Do you make pickles?
We don't make pickles because I grow the big ones, but I do have lots of cucumber recipes now. And I certainly, give them away to friends and family, and certainly could trade them for goods and services if and I'm sure people do that, right, out there in the world. So we want to preserve that. We also, as you mentioned, we want people to be close to this plant in every way, shape, and form. The more people learn about cannabis and touch cannabis and have cannabis in their lives, the lower the stigma, right? And so when the home grower harvests their crop and they realize and they can't make a vape pen cart, they'll go to the legal dispensary and buy one because they can't make that themselves, right? They can't make it themselves. So it's a very important part of the legal ecosystem, I think, is home growing. I also think, you don't want to have dispensaries on every corner per se. We do want to be smart about it, but we also don't
be nice to have at least one in every county.
Right? Or one in every community or neighborhood. We can do that. We distribute lots of things in that manner, neighborhood to neighborhood, community to community. And that's how it's going to have to be with cannabis if we're going to create one market and if we're going to eliminate the stigma that people are still carrying around, the shame that we're still carrying around. My brother and I, we have all these war stories from when we were in the illicit market, and sometimes we're in situations and people want us to tell those stories, and I even get nervous telling those stories. Even me now.
Well, we didn't get you to tell too many nervous stories today.
Because we have this shame and this stigma, right? And even someone like me, sometimes I have to check myself and say, you know what? This is a new time we're living in. Cannabis is good, not bad. Be loud and proud, tell the stories, and let people learn and discover this. Because once people learn and discover cannabis, they will, on their own, come to the conclusion that this is a good plant, not a bad plant. And once we hit critical mass on that, once we have that tipping point on the stigma, then we get one market.
Better days ahead. So
Better days ahead.
Can we plan on getting you again for a conversation about this has been really fun, and it's been great for us, and I'm hoping that we can do this again. You're a fascinating person. You're a great guest. You've added a lot of context to what we're all doing in this cannabis industry. Just a treat to get to know you a little bit.
Thank you for the great questions, and thank you for the Shakespeare. Always love that.
Super generous with your time, and we thank you very much for joining us.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Andrew.
So it's another podcast by Boveda. It's called Cultivate. We're bringing you the people and the technology that are blazing a trail in the cannabis industry.
Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, at Boveda Cannabis.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Andrew DeAngelo. Have a great day.
All right.